If you've ever walked along Queen Street in the heart of historic Cookstown, there's a little brick building you may have passed 100 times, without realizing just how many stories are hidden behind its walls. Look up at 22 Queen Street. You'll see an old clock still hanging over the sidewalk. And that's fitting, because this is a building whose story has a rather unusual relationship with time. Welcome to our Cookstown, Stories from the Village, where every building has a story. Today, we're stepping inside 22 Queen Street, and our story begins more than a century ago. According to the book Haunted Cookstown, written by Catherine Crowe and Amy Woodcock, the building at 22 Queen Street dates back to the late 1800s. It was once owned by Thomas Banting, who operated TAC Banting Jeweler and Optician here. But watches and jewelry weren't the only way this little building became connected to time, or to the people of Cookstown. In 1886, a telephone office was established inside the store, and in 1902, 22 Queen Street became Cookstown's official Bell telephone switchboard. Imagine Queen Street then. No cell phones, no text messages, no social media. Instead, telephone operators sat inside this very building, physically connecting one Cookstown resident to another. A call to a neighbor, news from family, business being conducted. Everyday conversations between people whose lives helped build this village. For almost 60 years, 22 Queen Street helped connect Cookstown. The switchboard remained here until 1960. Over the decades, the little building continued to reinvent itself. According to Haunted Cookstown, it served at different times as a restaurant, a quilt shop, a wicker shop, an art shop, and eventually an antique store. Then, in 1994, another chapter began. The Clock Store. Its owner, Bogdan Lukashek, specialized in repairing and restoring antique clocks and fine watches. And this is where our story becomes a little more mysterious. Crowe and Woodcock recount several unexplained experiences associated with the clock store and the antique timepieces that passed through it. One story in particular seems almost perfectly suited to this building. A woman brought a clock into the shop for repair. It had stopped working, but according to the story, it hadn't stopped at just any time. It had stopped at the time of her husband's death. Bogdan worked on the clock. At the store, it apparently worked perfectly. The woman took it home, and the clock stopped again. At the same time. She brought it back to 22 Queen Street. Again, Bogdan worked on it. Again, it worked. And again, she took it home. The clock stopped. At exactly the same time. Coincidence? Perhaps. But that wasn't the only unusual story associated with this building. During the paranormal investigation described in Haunted Cookstown, a medium named Sheila reportedly sensed the presence of a man associated with men's clothing, a tailor. There was just one problem. Research indicated that 22 Queen Street had never been a clothing store. At first, the story didn't seem to fit, until the researchers looked next door. They discovered that a neighboring building had once housed Eby and Company merchant tailors, established in 1899. The proprietor was W.J. Eby. That neighboring building was later destroyed in a 1939 fire, which the author's report also destroyed the Mansion Hotel. But there was another detail. The mysterious tailor had reportedly mentioned giving business to a shoemaker. And across Queen Street, the author's research found another connection. William Montgomery had purchased a store there in 1872, where he made and sold shoes. A tailor, a shoemaker, two businesses across the street from one another in a small Ontario village more than a century ago. And decades later, a story that seemed to connect them again. Coincidence? A forgotten piece of Cookstown history? Or perhaps something else? We'll leave that part for you to decide. What we do know is that 22 Queen Street has witnessed generations of Cookstown life. Jewelers, telephone operators, restaurant owners, shopkeepers, antiques, and clocks. Businesses came and went, neighbors changed, and Cookstown grew around it. Yet the little brick building remained. And today, another chapter is being written inside these historic walls. 22 Queen Street is now owned by Luxury and Lifestyle Real Estate Group. The building has traded telephone cords and antique timepieces for conversations about homes, families, and people's next chapters. And outside, that familiar clock still hangs over Queen Street. Perhaps that's appropriate, because more than a century after this building first became part of village life, it's still helping people connect. And maybe that's the real magic of an old town. History isn't always locked away behind museum glass. Sometimes, you're walking right past it. You've been listening to Our Cookstown, Stories from the Village. This episode was researched in part using Haunted Cookstown, written by Catherine Crowe and Amy Woodcock, copyright 2014. Historical information and paranormal accounts from the book have been independently retold for this community history project. Paranormal experiences are presented as accounts reported in the book and are not represented as independently verified events. Thank you to Catherine Crowe and Amy Woodcock for helping preserve these fascinating pieces of Cookstown's story. The next time you're walking along Queen Street, look up. You may discover that the buildings you've passed your entire life have stories you've never heard. Our Cookstown. Every building has a story.